Welcome, everyone. This is Enid Newberg. I am one of the people working on the Alexandria iBase project, and I'm going to basically be the behind-the-scenes host for Georgia Stathis discussion about forecasting using declination. The Alexandria iBase project, before we get there, just want to give you a little tiny bit about it. It was a few years back, not all that many, that two different groups of people were all talking about, don't we have something where we can have resources for astrologers? And it turned out that Georgia was having this conversation with Christine Skinner of the Urania Trust. I was having the conversation with Ann Beversdorf, and we all got together and decided, well, let's do it. And so we have been working on the idea of getting a catalog of catalogs so that we can find, wherever we can find, astrological materials in a library that we can see what kind of things they have. Because you go to an ordinary library and you're not going to find much of anything. And you're certainly not going to be able to search, like saying, oh, what's the horary books? Because that just doesn't happen. So that's basically what instigated this project, and we've been putting it together. We now have two librarians who are working on getting books into the catalog. We've got ourselves a website, and we are at a point where we definitely need to have some more funds and get the rest of the astrological community more involved. So that's kind of basically what this is all about. This is a peek at the catalog itself. As you can see, we have lots of different things in there that we can use. And so we're just busy trying to put it together so that astrologers from anywhere in the world can participate and have resources that they can, even if we can't be here, walk in, we can take this book. What we can do is say, did you even know this book existed? Isn't it amazing? And give you some clues as to where you might be able to track it down. Today, Georgia is going to be our presenter. She, longtime astrologer. She is one of those best types of business astrologers you want to actually go to because she practices what she preaches and does quite well. And so she is both an investor and the consulting astrologer. She's got a couple of good books on business out. And you have your finger in a number of different places besides the Alexandria project with the Hellenic Museum in Chicago. So today she is going to show how planetary declination works, especially when you're thinking in the mundane astrology level, which don't see very much about how to do this out there. So it's a really, really good workshop here or webinar to have and get some good information that's not easy to find. So I guess that's about it. Do you want to say anything else, Georgia, before I switch it over to you?
No, I love the way your PowerPoint looks. Mine is a little simpler, but I'm hoping they get it. And I'm very happy people can be here because this project, the project for the Alexandria iBase is actually going to be 4 years old legally. October 28th, we have our 4th birthday coming up, although we've been meeting for 6 or 7 years now.
And it took a little to figure it all out.
A little bit for us to get it going, but we're so happy you're here. And not only are we identifying books all around the world, we're also trying to get people to donate their research papers, copyright-free research papers. There's also going to be, and are on the website, a lot of copyright-free materials that we're trying to upload as well, because we need to have a place where people can go to find things, and that's the whole point. So I'm so glad everybody's here. And so with that, I think we can probably start.
Let me make you presenter. There you are. You can show your screen now.
Okay, I'm going to show my screen, and then I'm going to open up my PowerPoint, which is here from the beginning. Okay, see, and what I did, and mine's not as pretty as yours is, but I put the donation link here if anybody's interested in donating for this very worthy cause. So today we're talking about forecasting trends using declinations. Now, I'm not a specialist at this, but and there's so many things to look at. I mean, when you look all over the world right now, there's so many charts and there's so many things to look at. And when I do this, I like to have some sort of system down. And I'm going to show you how I do that. So whatever you would like to do with declinations, you can kind of use this system and make it your own to make it easier to see things coming up more quickly. But with that said, first, I'm going to just do a little overview here. We always work with natal charts, of course, but there's charts versus the declination of the movement of the planets. So when we look at one chart, we see a lot with transits, progressions, eclipses, and we can be, I believe we can be somewhat predictive of possible outcomes on questions for that specific chart. But when you're looking at a broader landscape, if you're looking at a broader of social programs, some of which we will be looking at today, or some countries that we'll be looking at today, when you're looking at a larger global landscape whereby now with the world being as small as it is, and it's becoming very small, you can actually start to see that the same kinds of patterns are crossing across several charts with this system. So one individual chart is good, but it's not the whole story. The idea of declination is that it shows us even more than when a transit hits a chart. It pinpoints things even more specifically. But first, to explain a little bit about declination, and then I do have a little drawing that I've had for a few years. The Earth tilts, it always tilts, and so the sun always reaches as far north as it will ever reach above the celestial equator at 23 degrees north, 27.5 minutes, or as far south as the sun can go as it will ever reach below the celestial equator at 23 degrees south, 27.5 minutes. Any planets that travel beyond 23 north, 27.5, or 23 south, 27.5, any planets that do that are considered to be out of bounds. And there's a lot of real wonderful specialists out there who've talked. Lee Weston is one. Kit Borer wrote a book on it. A lot of people are doing work with declinations. And of course, when a planet is out of bounds, which when you see some of the charts we're looking at today, there's a whole lot of these charts that have out of bounds planets. There is oftentimes, when they're activated, excessive or unconventional expression in their message. The one thing to always remember, though, and I think it's interesting considering that we have this Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn coming up by longitude, that Saturn never leaves the bounds of the sun. It always stays close to the bounds of the sun. So in a way, I think that's our reality check whenever we look at some of these things we're going to look at today. I think it's this thing in the end that actually saves the structure. So here's a little drawing. I've had this for a few years. It's pretty simple. What you're seeing is the celestial equator in the middle. Whenever we have fall equinox, which we just did at the end of September, or spring equinox, it's at the 0 point. As planets travel northerly, going northerly up to the Tropic of Cancer, which is 0 Cancer, they're considered to be north declination, 23.5 north. As planets travel southerly down to the Tropic of Capricorn, they're considered to be in the southerly declination. And right now, on today's date, I marked this for today's date, October 15th, 2019, Pluto is at 22 south, 23, just about, almost out of bounds. Saturn is really in bounds. It's not beyond, but it looks like it's out here. Jupiter is 22 south, 52, and Ceres, which I do work with asteroids. I do work with asteroids occasionally, but today I'm going to talk about a few of them, like Ceres and Vesta, because Ceres is Demetra in Greek mythology, and Ceres has to do with harvests and farms, etc. And since farming and trade agreements right now for the United States are up on the block, it'll be interesting to see how that shows up in some of these tables. So obviously things are really, really low in declination right now, and I always think of winter solstice. In fact, it's not my thought, but winter solstice, which is at the end of December, 0 degrees of Capricorn, it seems like in the northern hemisphere, not in the southern, but in the northern hemisphere, that things are frozen and cold, especially if you're living in more northerly states or like in Canada, etc. Cold doesn't mean things aren't happening. Cold often means things are brewing, that they're incubating. And the one thing I can just give you as an image is having grown up in Chicago as a young woman and going to school in Chicago before I moved out to California. I remember we would always have these big snowstorms in April after the spring equinox. And but the amazing thing to me always was that regardless how cold or how deep the snow was, inevitably these little purple crocuses always popped through the snow. It was questionable how long they were going to last, but they had the courage to pop through. So, you know, I'm saying that as an image of what people may be feeling right now with all these planets in the southern declinations, and especially not easy planets that are also not only not easy planets, but slower than molasses in January planets like Pluto and Saturn. And Jupiter's not so slow, but it's not fast. And Ceres is also somewhat slow. So I wanted to show this drawing so you would kind of get it. And actually, the next slide that you're seeing is just, you can actually do this in Solar Fire under, I think it's Graphic Ephemeris under declinations. And this is actually this is a projection of the declinations through about the end of 2021. So you can just see, looking at this, if you can see my cursor moving, how Jupiter and Saturn and Pluto, they're pretty much kind of going to stay here for a while at the bottom. And so as Americans, I think, being the Gemini, Sagittarius, Cancer combinations that we are, I think that we're very impatient for things to change. And Enid and I were talking about this before we started, that, you know, the United States is not even having its Pluto return to its natal Pluto until February of 2022. And at that point, I do think that we'll maybe become adults as a country. I think we're still in our late teenage phase at this point, and it's all reflected very much in what we see in front of us. And as we go through these charts today, I think you're going to see that there as well. Okay, so again, I'm going to reiterate things we all know, but for those of you who are somewhat new to this, in 2020, we are having 3 major cycles beginning anew. There's synodic cycles, when 2 planets come together and start a new cycle. The first one is coming up pretty quickly in terms of just its placement in the sky, the longitude, at 22 Capricorn 46 minutes. That's Saturn-Pluto. That's on January 12th. And that happens about every 33 to 38 years where they come together and they conjoin. I like it better that on April 4th through about November of next year, 2020, that Jupiter will then travel over the Saturn-Pluto and conjoin Pluto at 24 Capricorn, 53 minutes. I mean, as Enid had said earlier when we were talking, this could also mean we have too much overindulgence, or it could mean that somehow we're freed from some of the difficulties that we're seeing right now. And we'll talk more about this as we continue through the day. And at the end of next year, around the winter solstice, 2020, December 21, we're going to have the 20-year cycle of Jupiter conjoining Saturn, which actually I gave a talk to Chinese students this morning on the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction that's happening next year in the air element of Aquarius, which begins the new 200-year cycle in air. So we're also, if you think about that, we're leaving almost 200 years of Jupiter-Saturn being in Earth, which is the tangible, you know, buildings, houses, owning things, and moving into more of a mental mindset rather than owning things. So I think we're seeing with our younger people now that they're less attached to the material and more attached to ideas and ideals, if you will. More on that in a moment. So as I mentioned earlier, Capricorn is in the Tropic of Capricorn, which is an extreme south declination. Pluto is moving very slowly through that region, as it did when we were forming our country in the USA. And I think all the same issues that were happening right before we declared independence in 1776 are exactly the same issues that are happening now. They were rebelling against the king. They had been here a long time. They had tremendous stress with all the tariffs, the stamp acts, the quartering acts, And it was a time to really step up. Pluto is about having courage to step up and make a change. And regardless of how we feel right now, I do think our country is stepping up at this moment, and we'll be seeing some of that in the upcoming tables. Also, you're going to be looking at some of these tables today, how the declination, the declination of Uranus as it's moving, is activating some of these charts much sooner than if it was conjuncting or aspecting it, which is, I think, what's wonderful about declinations. You can get more pinpointing with the ideas. So this is, I know a lot of you who are watching this probably know this, but I thought you would like to see this. What I did is I just wanted to say, everybody's been talking about these conjunctions next year, 2020, but in reality, they're already here. Because if you look at these dates, and this is from Solar Fire, Jupiter began its parallel, which is like a conjunction to Pluto, which is supposed to happen April 4th of 2020. It already started its declination hit on January 14th of 2019, this last year. This is October 15th of 2019. Everybody's talking about Jupiter-Saturn conjoining at the end of next year, December 2020, but it actually, Jupiter began paralleling, like a conjunction, to Saturn on January 27th of 2019. So, you know, people are waiting for these things to happen. They're already happening. The big Saturn-Pluto, which, you know, breaks apart corporations and rules and governments and blows things out of the water. You know, that's not January 12th when it conjuncts by transit. It's actually already started in March of 2019 and also on July 15th of 2019, which is right around the time of the full moon eclipse that we had at 24 degrees of Capricorn in July on the 16th. Right on the Pluto-Mercury opposition in the US chart. Mercury is 24 Cancer in the US chart. And it was a lunar eclipse. And what's, I think, is fascinating about this, if you look at this date, Saturn parallel Pluto. You know, Saturn is karma. Saturn to Pluto is karmic repercussions of people who have taken on too much power. That's one way to look at this. And that was July 15th. And what's fascinating about this, because, and I don't want to go back and forth too much, but this is in alignment with this idea, is that in July, when we had that lunar eclipse at 24 Capricorn, 24 Cancer, 90 days after that, and I always like to watch 3 months, about 90 days after an eclipse when things get activated, that approximate 90 days was this last week when we had the full moon in Aries and Libra and Aries, squaring the Saturn-Pluto. So, you know, the revelations that are happening with our government in the USA right now about, you know, the discussions in July with Ukraine, the issues coming up with the lawyer Giuliani, the two people that he was dealing with, those already started at the beginning of this year. And it may be that when we look at a declination, it is the stirring of the pot, if you will, and then perhaps the conjunction of the last declinations when they conjoin are when things get rectified. But if you look at this, see, I ran this table all out to 2021. So, you know, Jupiter parallel Saturn was July 21, 2019. Jupiter parallel Pluto, which I found, by the way, when Jupiter is with Pluto, yes, they say people can be become wealthy with that. But I've also seen Jupiter conjunct Pluto or Jupiter parallel Pluto that people who have not been on the up and up are revealed. There's revelations about them, and especially when Saturn's involved as one of these alignments, because Saturn's about karmic payback. If you didn't do the thing right, it pays you back. And then you can see we have the Saturn parallel Pluto November 5th of this year, and Jupiter parallel Pluto March of next year, August of next year, October of next year, and then the Jupiter Saturn parallel, which is 4 days after December 21st of 2020, when Jupiter conjuncts Saturn. The last Jupiter to Saturn will be December 25th. So we've been dealing with this. It'll be almost, actually, if we look at this, we're looking at actually almost 2 years of this, not 2 years of this chaos, if you will. And then down here at the bottom, I ran a few the parallel lines with the line going across it is what we call contraparallel, which is when one of the planets is in the southerly declination and one of the planets is in the northerly declination at exactly the same degree and minute. And just, there might be people in the audience asking this question right now. When we consider something to be parallel or contraparallel, I think it is wise not to allow more than 15-minute difference, not to stretch it out to a degree. It should be no more than about a 15-minute difference, because if you get too stretched out, it's not as active. But as you can see, these are all pretty close. But first, let's go back to normal astrology, whatever normal astrology is. Let's look at some planets, some charts. We're going to go back and forth. This is kind of a non-linear presentation that always comes back to the same system that I use. So in the news, we've seen news about the USA, the Federal Reserve, which is getting pushed by the president right now, the European Bank, the New York Stock Exchange, the Social Security and Medicare issues, the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare, and the UK is having its own problems, United Kingdom, and of course we know now, China just had his 70th birthday, and for 6 months now, the young people in Hong Kong, which was actually released to China some years back, are revolting against the fact that China wants to come in and extradite prisoners to China and take over, make it less democratic. We'll be talking about those charts as well today. But first, we're just going to look at a few planets today in all of these charts. When we're dealing with the sun in a horoscope, it's the leader of the country. It's the lifeblood of the country or the organization. We're going to be looking at Mercury in a few of these charts today, and Mercury has a lot to do with commerce and trade. It also has to do with youth, young people, and I think that's going to be important when we look at the Hong Kong chart. Venus has to do with our values, one's liquidity, and one's cash flow. Saturn, of course, is part of the configuration. Saturn has to do with agriculture and real estate and land and buildings and structures. Ceres has to do with farmers, farming, and harvests. Jupiter is the big god, as I used to tell my children when they were little, the god of expansion, protection, and overextension and inflation as well. Uranus always represents volatility and revolt. It also represents innovation. And Vesta, we're going to be looking at today, and I'm looking at it because Bill Meridian gave some pretty incredible lectures a few years back that really kind of changed my view of Vesta. Vesta is Hestia in myth and story, and in the story, she gives her seat up to Dionysus in the pantheon of the gods when he takes his place with the pantheon of the gods, and she gives her seat up, and she goes to the center, and she is at the hearth, and she tends the holy flame. And actually, if you look at the logo for our group, Alexandria I-Base Project, that is kind of based on Hestia and Vesta, the holy flame, tending the fires to keep things going. But Vesta is also, in more practical language, Vesta is also part of the word called investments and sacrifice for those investments as well as dedication. So this is the system. And if anybody is interested in this, I can always send you separate copies of this. But what I did, because when you're looking at all kinds of charts, it can be so confusing after a while. When you work with a lot of charts and even a reading, your mind and your brain gets foggy. You suddenly can't see things. So what I decided to do is get the charts that I have, and there's possibly many of these charts, but I have a USA Sibley chart that I use. We're not going to work too much with this today, but I put this in here also if somebody wants to work with this and has some time. The chart based on declinations of when the first US dollar was created as a currency, the Federal Reserve, which is a time chart, the Social Security chart and its declinations, the Medicare chart, which started in 1965 and its declinations, and Obamacare, which is the Affordable Care Act. And what I did on today's dates, October 15, 2019, what I did is, if you see at the bottom, there's a blue strip here, and that's representing the 0 degree, the celestial equator. And then I have a blue arrow pointing up, which is the declinations going from the bottom at 0 degrees north up to, in this case, all the way up to 26 north 11, where we see Vesta out of bounds, of course, in the first US currency chart, which is an interesting thing to look at. And what I did, I tried to color code this because I think people learn better with color coding and tables. Anything that is out of bounds, and this is the northern declinations, I've made in a bold blue color. So for example, in the US, the Mars, which is pretty prominent in the US chart, it's on, if you use the Sibley, it's on the 7th house of the Sibley chart, is at 23 north 34 minutes. And Venus is right behind it at 23 north 31 minutes. So they're both out of bounds, which is interesting, because we have some extreme values in this country and we have some extreme actions in this country. And Mars also has to do with spending. And so the Federal Reserve chart has their Mars out of bounds at 25 north 33. I didn't highlight the Obamacare because we don't know exactly what time it was signed, if anybody's got a chart on that, because the moon changes about 12 degrees a day. So, but it's, in this case, it is out of bounds. It's 25 north 5 in the Obamacare, and the moon is the people. So, and then I have on each of these the US, this is the first US dollar, the Federal Reserve, Social Security, Medicare, and Obamacare. And on the left, what I did is for today's transits by declination, I put where, for example, Chiron is today at 4 degrees north, 2 minutes, within about 8 minutes of the US Neptune declination. We'll be showing that chart today. You're also seeing here Chiron by declination today is at 4 north because it just went into Aries in April of last year, I believe it was, and again this year. Chiron is 4 north 2 today, and the Obamacare, you know, Mercury is the agreement in the Obamacare, the papers that were signed. The Obamacare Mercury is 4 degrees north 4 minutes. So here we've got transit Chiron at 4 north 02, just 2 minutes away from hitting, 2 minutes away from hitting the Obamacare Mercury, and we'll talk about that when we look at the chart itself. It would be considered parallel. Chiron here is parallel by transit to the Obamacare Mercury right now. And also, interestingly enough, the transit of Vesta, which has to do with investments, as at 9 north 52 today, is just past the Chiron of the United States. And we've had some volatility. You're going to see that coming up a lot with tech stocks, and we've seen a lot of volatility because of the trade agreements. So, you know, this is not going away anytime soon. This is still pretty active. And then another one we're going to look at today, I think we have that chart on here, is today transit Uranus, which is in Taurus, of course, but at 12 north 44 is just short of hitting the Social Security Uranus, which is at north 52. They're only about 8 minutes apart. So we're already seeing some areas of these charts being lit up by declination, which we may not be able to see when we just look at the transits. So let me go to the next screen and show you the southerly declinations. Oops, no, this is a good example of what I was trying to explain. So this is the chart I have for the Affordable Care Act, the natal chart, which was March 23, 2010 at 12 a.m. in Washington, D.C. And again, I did that for 12 a.m. because I figured it probably started at the beginning of the day. So it may be a fairly closely timed chart. And I was talking a little earlier how Chiron, excuse me, the declination of Chiron is about to hit the declination of Mercury. By conjunction, it's going to conjunct the Mercury of the Obamacare on May 6th of 2021. Where is Mercury in the Obamacare chart? Mercury is in the 5th house at 10 degrees of Aries. Mercury rules Gemini, which is, I'm using the Koch system, by the way. I mean, I encourage people to use whatever system they want to use. Personally, I use Koch system because I find, for me, with transits going over the houses, it seems to be pretty accurate for timing. But when I do see in a Koch chart, for example, in this case, the 8th house which is support received from other people or money received from other people. At 25 Gemini, I'm going to also have to count that Mercury also rules most of the 7th house here. So interestingly enough, the 7th house is often referred to as open enemies. And in May of next year, 2021, Chiron conjuncts Obamacare Mercury, which rules the 7th of open enemies and support from other people. But we don't have to wait till May 6th of 2021, because the debate has been flying since as far back as the election of 2016. But what I did here is I thought you might find it interesting to see how long by declination that Chiron has been parallel, almost like a conjunction to the Mercury in this chart. Here you see it started around June 11th of 2018. It continued through August 8th of 2018. I mean, there's nothing but debate about, pay versus private pay versus this versus that. We're having all these debates now. In fact, I think there's a debate tonight. We also saw April 14th of 2019, Chiron was parallel Mercury in this chart. October 14th, which was just yesterday, Chiron was parallel Mercury. It's going to again hit on February 29th, 2020, a leap year next year. Chiron will parallel Mercury, but really, are we not? I don't know if we'll even see anything settled until we get closer to the actual conjunction of Chiron on the Mercury, but it's already in play. This is what we have to remember when we're working with declinations. It's not just that day. These things can happen for a very long period prior to. And by the way, you can get this sort that I have in Solar Fire. When you look under transits, you just hit the declination button and it'll bring it up. And then all you have to do is sort it by aspect. And then I have a little program that will just snip it out. It's called Snippet. And then I can cut and paste if you want to make PowerPoints. It's much easier to do that than, running it through Excel, etc. It's more technical. But anyway, the other thing that's interesting about this during this whole time that Chiron, which is, Chiron is, I look at Chiron as a hybrid. He was a hybrid. He was half horse and he was half human. He was half God. He was half mortal. His name is in the word chiropractor. I find Chiron is very much in the charts of people who are in either the holistic health practices as well as the more traditional medical practices. And I also find it as a hybrid where you combine more traditional healing systems with Uranian, less traditional healing systems. And what I found to be very interesting, especially with the legalization of marijuana that's happening quite regularly throughout the United States right now. And in fact, I think in the Florida ballot, I live in Florida part-time, I'm there tonight actually, they actually have an appeal to put it on the Florida ballot for a medical, you can get your medical marijuana license here, but to put it as a recreational use like they have in California and Colorado, that's one of the debates that's been happening. But if we go to the idea of declination, if you look at the fact that transiting Neptune by declination has been parallel to Chiron, August 5th of 2018, February 26th of 2019, November 5th of 2019, and December 15th of 2019. This is an indicator possibly that less traditional medication, if you will, dope as some people used to call it, is entering the system, is becoming part of the system, and that they're learning how to use it for people. I know in Florida, the reason it passed about 3 or 4 years ago was it was passed for epilepsy for children. Charlotte's Web, I think, was the name of it, that they found it was very helpful in epilepsy for children. So, this is another way to use this is, what changes are coming up in the laws and what planets rule those laws. Okay, so here's the same drawing. Now, let's go one more down. See, is that right? Okay, yeah, I wanted to refer this again. I had spoken a little bit earlier about Social Security. There's a lot of debates right now. Should people be older? when they retire now, you can't go any further than 70, but there's a lot of debate happening right now about if people should be older, 72 or 73 years of age. And, you know, people are waking up to the fact that there's more and more people that are older that are actually still working. Many times not because they have a choice, but because they have no choice, but also because people are just living just a lot longer. Nobody's really dying anymore. So there is kind of an awakening. Uranus is awakening to the fact that things may have to change. And here we see transit Uranus by declination today at 12 North 44, very close to hitting the Uranus. You know, Uranus has a lot to do with large groups, large communities, you know, a community of people who need help. So we see the declination of transit Uranus about to hit Uranus in the Social Security chart. And what I have in front of us next is the Social Security chart, which was August 14th, 1934. I again figured this for 12 a.m. because it had to start for the whole day, but we don't have an exact time of signing. So currently, transit Uranus is at 12 North 44 on the Social Security Uranus on October 19th, 2019. It's going to hit. And I fast forwarded through a declination ephemeris, and I saw that it will hit again on March 26, 2020. And I'm giving you these dates because if you have a lot of time and nothing else to do, you know, this is the problem with, if we had somebody who would pay us for research, it would be great. It would be very interesting to do research to see what news shows up around these dates regarding these various charts based on the transits of the declinations. And, you know, I just thought I would share it. I did a terrible drawing job here, but I didn't have my Wacom tablet with me on this trip. So what I basically did here, this is a vertical declination scale, where you see the north going north on the left, and this is the south on the right. And here is natal Uranus in the Social Security at 12 North 44, and the natal is at 12 North 52, and the transit is 12 North 44 on October 19th. You might want to make a note of that. And March 26th, what will be the news concerning the Social Security program, if there's some new ideas coming in which to change it. I have a feeling that they're going to raise the retirement age. I have a feeling they're going to do that because a lot of people just aren't retiring right now. It's another example of a chart and the declination. So here's the southerly declinations. This is from, what I have here is the 0 is at the top, and I have the ones closest to the celestial equator, which is where my cursor is moving. And I have again USA, the first USA dollar, the Federal Reserve, Social Security, Medicare, Obamacare. And then what I did on this one is I moved it going south. So obviously USA Saturn is at 3 South 31, as opposed to, as opposed to the declination of the United States Pluto, which is at 23 South 43. And it's interesting, if you look at down here, remember the out of bounds are the ones that I put in bold. The USA Pluto at 23 South 43 is pretty darn close to the first, when the first US dollar was created. And I have a chart for that if anybody's interested in. I actually have it in my pack here somewhere. And the USA Pluto at 23 South 43 is pretty darn close to the Federal Reserve Sun at 23 South 26. So when we see transiting planets hitting these degrees and minutes by declination, on those dates, we see changes. We're also seeing right now, which I thought was pretty fascinating, by transit right now, Ceres farming is at the outermost regions. It's at 25 South 23, outermost regions. And you know, they can't seem, they keep saying they're getting a trade deal together for the farmers who have really lost quite a bit of the purchases of their crops. China's not buying. I know China had I think it was 25% loss of their swine. I think there was a swine disease. And I know that they were purchasing a lot of our soybeans to to feed their swine, which is interesting. But I know a lot of crops are being purchased out of South America now until these trade deals can be rectified. But, I don't know if we can do that quite yet because Ceres pretty much is out of bounds. And I could look up when she's going to get back in bounds. I didn't do that. Somebody might want to do that for some research here. But you can see that even the Ceres in Federal Reserve is out of bounds at 25 South 49. It's interesting. I don't know how this could happen, but I did think that somehow the Federal Reserve might be involved in some sort of help with farmers, but that was just an idea. It's not verified. It was a thought. Okay. If you also look here at the Federal Reserve Venus, which is your value system, your liquidity, the Federal Reserve Venus is 22 South 43. Right now, transit Pluto is at 22 South 23, about 20 minutes away from that Venus. And the truth of the matter is we have such low interest rates right now that, and this is true for the European Bank and many of the large central banks of the world, we have such low interest rates now that if there was in fact a sudden dip or a sudden recession, there's not much of a safety net underneath this at this time. And so, I was somewhat concerned when I saw the fact that Saturn is at 22 South 29, pretty close to this Venus in the Federal Reserve chart. And they're being pushed around too. I mean, they are being pushed around by the president. They're supposed to be a separate entity, but they are being pushed around, and hopefully they'll hold on to their value system so that we can move through this. What a lot of people don't know is that, 3% to buy a home or 4% is extremely cheap. And it used to be when I sold real estate, and there used to be these mortgage books that you used to get, and the cheapest mortgage you could get in those days was 9%. That was considered super cheap. We haven't had anything like that for at least 20 years. So there's not a whole lot of a safety net right now with this Venus 22 South 43 and Pluto hitting it and Saturn hitting it and Jupiter hitting it. And, Jupiter going over the Venus of the Federal Reserve is, they're asking them to do more and more and more and help more and more and more. But at some point, I'm hoping that Saturn, which doesn't move outside of bounds, keeps them holding steady, because it could be that if they're pushed too much and they accommodate too much, that their entire structure could fall. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't know the leader, Powell's chart. I don't have Jerome Powell's chart, but I think he's so far been standing up to our president. So we'll see with that. But I thought, and Mercury is also trade also. And if you see here in the Federal Reserve chart, Mercury is the ability to trade and have commerce and cut deals, if you will. And so we're going to be seeing activity with that as well. Okay. So I'm using the normal chart for the USA, not normal. Some people don't use this chart. Some people like Michael Munkasey, who just sent me a fascinating article about his reasons for using Virgo rising for the country. That is, if anybody would like that, I'd be happy to send that to them. But I do use the Sibley chart, which is 5:10 p.m., Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, July 4th, 1776, which gives us 12 Sag rising, 12 Gemini on the 7th house, 1 Libra on the midheaven, and 1 Aries on the IC. So, obviously the big Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter, Pluto conjunction are hitting just before our natal Pluto next year. And as I said much earlier in this recording, we will not have the Pluto return to the US chart until February of 2022, which seems like forever, but 2 years is not that far away. So, and we also saw when we were looking at the table that's so much more useful, I think, we see Mars on the angle here, and Mars and Venus in this chart are out of bounds. They operate from the seat of their pants, if you will. And what I did here is what I thought you should see is in the top right here is just some of the transits, just straight transits coming up to the US chart. I haven't heard a lot of people talking about this, but Pluto opposing Mercury, that's the transformation of trade agreements. period. So this isn't over yet, folks. I mean, we've got that February 27th, 2020. It's happening again on June 26th of 2020. So I thought you should see that. And also here, it's Pluto at semi-square to Ceres farmers. And and that can, you know, semi-squares, when I wrote my synodic cycle book, I talked about the 45-degree angles. Those are where you have to get through all the red tape, where you have to overcome the obstacles. I used to, a long time ago, I read a great book that said something about semi-squares, and I thought, wow, it sounds like if you're walking through the grass, if it was a snake, it would have bit you. You know, that's kind of how I look at it. So if we're looking at farming, or the farmers or the poor farmers, what they're going through, they're overcoming their obstacles right now. And based on just transits, the Pluto semi-square series is February 9th of 2020. It's again on July 17th of 2020. So a lot of this is not going to be resolved right away. They keep saying it's going to be resolved, but it's not going to be resolved. But if you look at the lower right grid here, and this is what I do like about this particular Solar Fire program, it'll actually show you in a table under reports by color where the planets are that are out of bounds. And you can see by seeing this that Venus is out of bounds 23 north 31, Mars is 23 34, and Pluto is at 23 south 43. And actually, Mars is 23 34 north, and Pluto is 23 south 43. So they're within that 15-minute difference. So in the US chart, even though it looks like in the US chart, Mars is quincunx, a wide quincunx to the US Pluto, which is also can be a juggling act, if you will, in the by declination, because there's only about, well, let's see, is it a 1949? Nope, it's a 9-degree difference. That's it, 9-minute difference. So really, Mars in the US chart and Pluto in the US chart are really what we would call contra-parallel. It's like having a Mars opposition Pluto. And the thing I'm thinking about for next year is as we begin to have these eclipses, which are going to be, you know, when the North Node goes to Gemini and the South Node goes to Sag, it's going to be activating this Mars, possibly the Mars-Pluto contraparallel. And at the same time that is happening, and by the way, I did look at it the other day. I was attending a really good workshop by Grace Morris, and we were looking at the end of next year, 2020, when right after the election. And that's when you're going to see the North and South Node, obviously they run with the eclipses, squaring Neptune after the election, a month after the election. So, you know, this, and our president is a sun in Gemini and a moon in Sagittarius, and it'll be eclipses on his sun and moon, Neptune squaring his sun and moon, opposition, and then we see this activating here. So I don't know, you know, I don't know if he will remain in office. I thought at once that he might get in, but I'm starting to look at some of these declinations and thinking, I think that we may see a change based on this impeachment proceedings that have just started, but we really don't know for sure. Oh, yeah, this is the transits of Chiron parallel the US Neptune. See, you wouldn't, if you look at where Chiron is right now, Chiron's about 4 degrees Aries, right about here by transit. It has no relationship to the Neptune in the US chart at 22 Virgo, absolutely no relationship. There's probably some sort of some minor aspect here, but nobody would really see that at all. But if you look at the transits of the declinations and you go back to June 22nd of 2018, transit Chiron was already paralleling, like it was conjuncting Neptune, which is in the 9th house. And that, you know, it's interesting. Neptune in the 9th, the ideal, you know, the ideal. What is our philosophy? That things are possible, that dreams can happen. That dreams can happen if you work hard, Neptune and Virgo in the 9th in a Sagittarius house. But then we look at these transits by declination, and we look at June 22nd of 2018, and we look at July 28th of 2018, and we look at it again at April 18th of 2019, this year, and again October 9th, which just passed, of 19. I do believe in America. I think it is a place where dreams can take place, but the idea of American dream has been beaten up pretty badly in the last couple of years. When Saturn was squaring transiting Neptune, when Saturn was squaring the natal Neptune in the chart, of course, but now we see Chiron, and Chiron heals, but it also has to break something first before it heals. That's how Chiron operates. But the other way we can look at this as well, hybrid industries coming into the healing professions. Chiron parallel Neptune, Chiron parallel Neptune, Chiron parallel Neptune, Chiron parallel Neptune. And so, you know, it's just another way of looking at the chart. I just wanted to show that to you. I don't know, does anybody have any questions at this point? Because we're like halfway through and I don't know, is anybody understanding this? Is it too fast?
There was one a little bit ago where they said, could you slow down a little bit? But you did then at that point. So I think we're following. I don't see any questions yet. Okay, good. All right. So, excuse my throat. So now this is all the southerly declinations that are activating the US chart that we can get out of solar fire. So again, we see what I had said earlier, Jupiter parallels the US Pluto. It paralleled it on September 5th, 2019. So, you know, it's very interesting. If we're looking at the stock market as one of the issues here, the market's having all kinds of volatility, but people are still making money. I think it's ironic, actually. September 21st, Jupiter parallel Saturn. September 21st, that was right around the fall equinox. And it was sometime around late September that we started hearing some of the news that we're hearing right now. And then November 5th, I'm very interested in seeing what's going to happen on November 5th, because Saturn will be parallel to US Pluto at that juncture. And I think that's probably the last parallel to the US Pluto at that juncture. And what I have found when I do these things is that sometimes the last one, the last parallel, until the new series begins again, is when a lot of things come to the surface and they're resolved. So just wanted to throw that out there as a possibility. Okay, Saturn has to do with government. Okay, so again, a review. Again, the planets. The sun is the leader of a country, the life of the country or the organization. Mercury is commerce, youth, trade. Venus is values, liquidity, cash flow. Saturn is agriculture and real estate. Ceres is, by the way, Jupiter parallel Saturn, also real estate prices have gone way out of sight. That's the other thing to just mention. And that's not a forever thing. I'm just going to say that. Ceres is farmers and farming. Jupiter is expansion and protection. Uranus is volatility, innovation, and revolution. And Vesta is investment. So now, no, it's like doubling up here. So this is the Federal Reserve chart, which is a time chart from Lois Rodden. December 23, 1913, 6:01:27 p.m. in Washington, D.C. And you can see Mars is right at the ascendant position here, where Saturn just stationed to go direct by longitude, by transit. But if you look over here to the right on this graph, Mars is really out of bounds. It's 25 north, 33. And interestingly here too is Ceres is very out of bounds, 25:49. And they are about 16 minutes apart, a little wide. But I would say that Mars and Ceres are what we would call contra-parallel, like oppositions to each other. So if you look at the transit of the chart, if you look at the natal structure, you see Mars at 19 Cancer and Ceres at 7 Capricorn. They're not really opposite. I mean, Ceres would have to move another 12 degrees to be opposite the Mars. But if you look by declination, they're already
contraparallel. So, you know, and if you think about it, the farmers in this country, farmers supply a great deal of revenue for this country. Vast amounts of land here, all kinds of crops. We basically feed the world, being the cancer that we are. And it has a lot to do with our identity. And so, you know, if we're looking at these hard hits coming up by declination, you know, what is it? Don't bite the hand that feeds you is basically, don't bite the hand that feeds you. It's important to keep abreast of what's happening with them. Now, the other way that we can look at this with the farming industry is, in a good way, is that they're also technologically becoming very, very sophisticated. I mean, they've improved. They do everything by drones now, and they have automatic watering systems, and they have it's masses and masses. And there's a lot of change that has happened with more and more organic farming coming into this country as well, which I do think is a movement we're going to see more and more of in the future. So I thought you might like to see the transits of the parallels and contraparallels to the US, to the Federal Reserve chart. There was something in here that I wanted you to look at. Oh, yeah, Pluto parallel Mercury, contracts, agreements with other people. You know, I know there's a lot of issues with a lot of debt right now. There's a lot of debt. And I could see why the Federal Reserve doesn't want to put out any more money out there, because they don't have that much as a return right now. We see Saturn parallel the moon here, March 22nd, 2020, and Saturn parallel the moon again on June 21, 2020, and Saturn parallel the moon again on December 31, 2020. And the moon is real estate. It's also one of the planets that rules real estate. And you know, there was a real tightening of funds when we had the meltdown in 2008 and 2009. And I personally think that properties are overvalued right now. And I think what's going to happen, the Federal Reserve is going to start pulling its belt in. It's not necessarily going to raise the rates, but it's not going to be loaning institutions the kind of money that it's been loaning, because it's trying to maintain it. It's trying to operate at the survival level, and I think it's going to be doing this all the way through the end of 2020, if not later than that. Okay, we don't need that. So China and Hong Kong. And I have the New York Stock Exchange chart, but we're not going to talk about that tonight, but I have that on this next table. So what you have here is a table for the China chart, Hong Kong chart, the United Kingdom, when the euro began as a currency, European Central Bank, and the New York Stock Exchange. I really don't have a lot tonight because we're only limited with our time. It's about 7:30, but these are the northerly declinations starting at 0 at the bottom. The transits going north are on the left here right now for today. And these are the natal declinations for each of these countries. The two we're looking at tonight are, or the three if we have some time, is the UK as well. China, Hong Kong, and the UK. So first of all, looking at this table, Uranus is out of bounds for China. Well, it was founded on revolution, as was ours. Mercury is out of bounds at 24 north 16. This is very, very important because Mercury rules youth, young people. And I had mentioned earlier, when a planet is out of bounds, it can express itself as extreme, if you will. And so with all the southerly declinations of Pluto and Saturn and Jupiter that have been happening, they have basically been contraparallel to the Mercury in the Hong Kong chart. And we've been seeing nothing but rebellion by the young people in Hong Kong since spring of 2019. And it'll show up again when we look at the chart itself. In the UK, I have Lynn Bell's chart for the UK, 12:01, I think, a.m. The moon, which rules the people, 26 north, 57 minutes. It's an out of bounds moon. And excuse me, I'm getting a little, let me get some water. And then just looking at this is the New York Stock Exchange. I actually have David Beasley's chart, which is an accurate chart. Actually, if I have that data, let me see if I have it written down here. Oh, I don't have it with me. Let's see. I have all these papers in front of me like I always do. Okay, I'll have to get you that data. If anybody wants the New York Stock Exchange data, I can get that to you. Oh, here it is. Here it is. This is from David Beasley. This is not mine. Oh, I can't read it. My glasses aren't very good right now, so I can get that to you. But one of the things I wanted to show you in the New York Stock Exchange, just looking at from the table, Venus, which is values and cash flow. The Venus of the New York Stock Exchange chart is 12 north 00, and Uranus by transit has been going back and forth over that at 12 north 44. And what have we been seeing? We've been seeing a lot of volatility. Up, it's down, it's up, it's down, it's up, it's down. We also, if we look here, Vesta by transit today is 9 degrees north 52 minutes. And even though we're not showing that chart right now, the Saturn of the European Central Bank is 9 north 01. So Vesta has been messing around with the declination of the Saturn of the European Central Bank, and they have had some problems with their investments. I mean, things have been very tight over there. It will continue. It'll hit the Venus, then it'll hit the moon. All right, so this is the southerly declinations. Being 0 is the celestial equator at the top. So we go from 0 down to out of bounds 23, 24, 25 down here. So interestingly enough, here's China. The Chinese chart that I have, I think, is October 1st, 1949 at 3:15 p.m. in Beijing. So it's pretty close, pretty closely timed chart. So their moon is pretty closely timed. So they have their moon at 24 south 22, their out of bounds moon. And think about this, their out of bounds moon is the people, 24 south 22. If we go back to Mercury, youth, young people, Hong Kong, 24 north 16, north. This is 24 south 22. There's only about a 6-minute difference between those two. So the natal moon, the people of China, is contraparallel the Mercury of Hong Kong within just a few minutes. So here it's like an opposition, moon opposite Mercury, moon opposite Mercury. So, you know, the basic family called China is conflicting with the youth of Hong Kong. And, you know, I have a theory because I also noticed here in the China chart, Vesta is a 25 south 01. And, you know, it's not within what I would call a close parallel, but, you know, it still needs to be taken into account. And I had this thought a few months ago when all this stuff started with Hong Kong, and I don't know if it's valid, but the thought I had was the trouble in Hong Kong began by the young people as China started to put its thumb on the way the democracy in Hong Kong works. And that started pretty much in line with when the tariff wars began. So my thought, because Hong Kong is a major financial center for the world, major, and it's democratic, even though it was turned over to China when it was turned over. But my thought on this was, it just sort of came to me recently, was when the tariff wars began with China, all of a sudden China started putting its thumb down on Hong Kong and imposing their philosophy with the democratic agreement that they had with Hong Kong at the same time that the tariff wars began. And I don't know if there's a tie-in between those two things, but then I look at the fact that Vesta here is at 25 south 1 and their moon is 24 south 22, out of bounds, and we've had a lot of activity there. And Ceres is farming, Vesta, that there's a lot of chaos right now. So they're hungry. They're struggling financially. So where are they going to go? They're going to go where the honeypot is. They're going to go to Hong Kong. So until it'll be interesting to see when the tariffs, if they get resolved between the U.S. and China, if the activity in Hong Kong stops or slows down. But that was a connection that I had made just recently when I was doing the research on this. I thought, wow, you know, this is interesting. Okay, so let's look at, this is the China chart, October 1, 1949, 3:15 p.m., Beijing, China. And here's Vesta, very out of bounds, 29 Sag 10. You can actually see it over here, 25 South 01. And their Uranus is out of bounds, 23 North 35, even though it looks pretty normal at Uranus in Cancer in the 5th house. They have that Saturn-Pluto conjunction, the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction, and eventually the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction going over their moon. And it was very interesting because this morning I was doing a presentation for them, and they were just a great group of people. And I started talking about the transformation of leadership, and I had to stop because it became very, we had to be very careful about what I was saying. But I can say it here. Maybe people from China are listening. I don't know. But I think that the government in China is going to have to soften with this situation, especially with the Saturn-Pluto going over their Jupiter, then Jupiter-Pluto going over their Jupiter. And, you know, with these eclipses that are hitting them, they're going to have to come to some sort of midway view. It may not be for at least another year until after the Jupiter-Saturn hits their moon and goes over their ascendant. But I do think, there's going to have to be some sort of relaxation with that, because when we looked at the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in where it's taking place in China's chart, it was happening in their 11th house where the conjunction was taking place. I don't want to get too off on that, but it was sort of tied in, and the Sun square Chiron was pretty prominent in all the Jupiter-Saturn charts, which means that all the leaders of all these countries that I was looking at are going to have to go to some sort of like midpoint of agreement, some sort of compromise. Otherwise, there's a great deal of wounding that takes place. I mean, that's what showed up in all the charts this morning. And here's the transits by declination to the Chinese chart. I thought I had something. No, it's in the Hong Kong chart. I'll show that. Let me show it to you here. Here it is. These are the transits of declinations to the Hong Kong chart. Now, if you look at the Hong Kong chart, here's Mercury, where Saturn, you know, Saturn just recently stationed about 18, 19 degrees direct. It was sitting very close to that Mercury, which is their youth. And it's funny, I have an arrow. Oh, here it is. Except the arrow shouldn't be there. It should be a little further up. If you look at here, the transit, the declination transit of Uranus in the Hong Kong chart is parallel the moon. It's like a conjunction to the moon. Even though when you look at their moon, it's 19 Taurus. Uranus is not going to get to 19 Taurus for a couple more years. But by declination, transit Uranus is paralleling their moon, May 5, 2020, December 15th, 2020. So, you know, this is the people rebelling. This is the moon is the public. It's the people rebelling against whatever they're being told they have to do. They have Jupiter paralleling their Jupiter, so they have faith in themselves, that's for sure. And there will be, and this is down here at the bottom, is the contraparallels that started in 2018, like oppositions. Chiron contraparallel Mars, Chiron opposition to Mars. Jupiter contraparallel the Sun, the leaders of the country. Jupiter opposing the Sun. Now, what's an opposite? A contraparallel is like an opposition. What's an opposition? Opposition is 180 degrees. Contraparallel is same degrees north and same degrees south. Still, let's think of the idea of an opposition. An opposition, in terms of a circle, is 180 degrees. you can't get any further. You can't go to 181 degrees. You can only go to 180, at which point you either the rubber band breaks and you change, or things collapse. So the sun in countries are leaders. So here we have November 7th, 2019. This is Hong Kong. Carrie Lam, I don't know how much longer she's going to be there, if she's already gone. January 4th, 2020. This is transit Jupiter opposite or contra-parallel the sun, the leader of the country. Then January 28th of 2020, we see Saturn opposite contra-parallel, like a contra-parallel is like an opposite Venus. Venus is the ruler of the 7th house, open enemies, partnerships. So, you know, there's going to be, looking at this, Jupiter contra-parallel Venus, Neptune contra-parallel Saturn, there is going to be, I think, this is an opinion, more world support about what's going on in Hong Kong, and people deciding to maybe pull some of their agreements with Hong Kong until things are resolved with these oppositions that are coming up. That's an opinion. But the big thing that I saw with this was the Uranus parallel the moon, which is the people of a country. And so, you know, they're not going to sit still. This could possibly continue all the way through the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction of December 21, 2020, which is when it gets very close, the Jupiter-Saturn, to China's moon, at which point something has to happen. Something has to give here. And I do think with the Jupiter-Saturn alignment coming up in Aquarius that I think all the technology, the networks, the communication, intergalactic communication, global communication, I think that's, you know, it's called the morphogenetic field. I think that we're seeing more and more people moving in the same direction of some sort of fairness and equality with these particular kinds of issues. But we'll see. We will see what happens. I just thought it was very interesting to look at these parallels. So, and there's the youth thing that we were talking about. So, okay, I think, let me just make sure. Oh, what time? It's 7:45. Well,
if you have a juicy one.
I was going to look at the UK.
Oh, please do.
Yeah, I mean, they're poor things. I feel so sorry for them. But, you know, if you look at their chart natally, they're born on a full moon. The sun opposes the moon. And they've had, by transit, they've had Saturn going through the 4th house for God knows forever. It's not really going to be out of there till probably close to the end of next, no. Probably not until about mid, if not late, 2020. Yeah, 2020. No, 2021. And they've had Saturn sitting, you know, and Pluto sitting right on their Vesta by transit. And they're poor leaders. I mean, you know, you would think just looking at this chart, Saturn on the sun, it's long past. Saturn opposing the moon, moving past it. But no, not happening, folks. Because if you look at the declination transits for them, here's transit Pluto by declination, continuing to parallel the sun, which is the leader, whoever ends up being the leader. I mean, I don't even know how long Boris Johnson's going to last. But this is Pluto parallel the sun, like a conjunction to the sun. Look at these dates. I mean, it just goes on and on, because Pluto is slow. 2022, October 2022, August of 2023, December of 2023, July 18th of 2024. It just goes on and on and on. And of course, it affects their bottom line. And here we see Pluto by conjunction hitting their Venus, which is March 9th of 2020, June 14th of 2020, and January 9th of 2021, going into late 2021. But by parallel, Pluto stays on their Vesta, which is their investments, which is, you know, I don't know how good a deal they're going to cut with the Brexit. This stays active all the way through May 28th of 2024. That's a long time. That's 4 or 5 years. That's well past when Saturn would have left their 4th house and gone into their 5th house. So, you know, I wanted to show this to you because somebody looking at just the natal chart would go, okay, well, you know, it looks like Saturn's going to be off the sun and opposite your moon, and you're going to be, looks like it's going to lighten up, which is possible. Of course, you look at the houses these planets rule as well. The sun rules the 11th, which is goals, and the people in the community, in the global community that can help them. And, you know, they're going to have to do some fancy footwork here to try to negotiate some pretty strong deals. And, you know, there's power struggles here among the leaders. I mean, they just shut down, Boris Johnson just shut down Parliament 3 weeks ago to wait for the Brexit decision. But, you know, I really, you know, my heart went out to them when I saw this. I thought, wow, Pluto on their Vesta. So I would, you know, if you're into investing, maybe pounds would be a good investment right now. I don't know. I'm not a financial trader, but it might be, since the pound would be less valued right now. And you always, if you're going to buy something, you buy it when it's lower. That might be one way, a positive way of looking at this. We may see the death of some leaders here with Pluto parallel the sun. I know what was it, Hammond, I think he just left when he said, when Boris Johnson went in, he said, I'm not going to stay if Boris Johnson is in. So we'll see. I just thought you'd like to see the transits by declination to the UK. I just mentioned this. Yeah, there it is. Okay, but the way to do this, easy, effortless, effective, is use the tables. When you do this sort of thing, compartmentalize the groups of charts you're reviewing. If you're working with a family, for example, you can make a table like this. And then you can see things in terms of where the transit north or south of the celestial equator is moving by declination, and how it's hitting within 15 minutes any of the charts in the family that you're working with on the table. You can also use this if you have a lot of time and nothing else to do. You know, maybe you're looking at a certain sector of investments, you know, a certain sector like discretionary spending or consumer staples. And some of the stocks, if you're interested in that sort of thing, put those stocks together on a table like this, and then watch the transits as they move through, as well as the eclipses. And it, you know, it really is a nice way to see a broader picture of what you're working with, so you can kind of step back and have a better judgment about what you're looking at. And so what I've done is just included these tables again at the end. If anybody wants these tables, I'm more than happy to send them to you. You can just empty my information or make your own. This was done in Word with the table creator as best as I could. So, okay, and then there's a little commercial always. Please donate to Alexandria iBase Project if you want to preserve your future as an astrologer and your literature or other people's literature. Also, for my own personal, we have the new cheat sheet available, the Star Cycles cheat sheet, which is it's not just one page, but this is what it looks like, where I color code the eclipses and the retrogrades and the directs, and that's available through starcycles.com, as is our new book, Pushing Through Time, and my other book, Business Astrology, which you can get only for $10 at our website. You cannot get Business Astrology at Amazon for $10, but you can get Pushing Through Time at either Star Cycles or at Amazon as a paperback or Kindle. And I will let you know that any money that I make from the sales of any of my products, a portion does go back into the Alexandria iBase Project. That's been my goal from the very beginning, because I really do believe that we have to save our literature and we have to be able to identify where it is. And I hope that you feel the same. And thank you so much for coming this evening and being here and taking the time. I wish you well in the next few months with your declination studies.
Thank you, Georgia. There was one question here where they're just sort of checking that if you're doing this kind of work, you're specifically looking at transits or at declination transits. But, well, I guess I'll add this on from me. When you have you seen that when the longitude and the declination create at the same time, the parallel and
that's strong. That you can circle those with your red pen, you know, and put those in your book. That's what I do. I do that. I actually circle things and put them in the book. And actually, that's a good question because I actually have I'm on I don't know what they call it, an alert for the Federal Reserve. So I've been playing with that, the alert with the Federal Reserve. So I get these alerts, and then I look to see where I made my notes for the year. I know it's not like I have a lot of time to do a lot of this, but yeah, if it's aligned by transit and longitude and it's parallel, that's gold, you know. And you can do that with your own chart. I mean, that's a perfect way to look at this system to see if it works for you. Is just do it with your own chart, and then just mark your book for the year when you see something. I mean, you could even work with the faster ones, Mercury and Venus and Mars and all that stuff too. But today I was just working with more of the outer planets because we're looking more at mundane today. But yeah, that's golden when you have a combination.
Okay. Another question is, do you find there's any difference between having a parallel that occurs northern hemisphere versus a parallel in the southern?
I have never looked at that really. The only thing I know from looking at this is that when things are really south, like really south, it seems like there's no hope. It seems like there's a hopelessness around. The cultures seem hopeless. It feels like nothing is going on. I've seen that. But no, I haven't really I've not looked at that. That would be, I would like to hear somebody do a workshop or an article on something like that. That would be interesting.
I think it would be a hard one to tease out, but it would be fascinating.
There is a thing that people have used with the secondary progressed moon called the earning cycle, which is a really old thing that people did. It actually is pretty interesting though, where you plot by declination your secondary moon, which moves about 1 degree a month, and you can actually plot that. And SolarFire has a pretty easy graph where supposedly when the secondary moon goes above 0 degrees up into the northern declinations, that your earnings are supposedly increase. And when the secondary moon begins to hit the celestial equator at 0 Libra and go now below south, that there's a change in your earnings, or they are decreased, or you could be also incubating, which is what I found with the really lower declinations. And that's kind of an interesting thing to look at with the secondary moon to see if that works with you. That's called the earning cycle, where you can actually plot that, because secondary moon comes back every 28 years.
Right.
So you see it up and down. It's like an S curve in SolarFire. You can draw that up under the graphic ephemerises.
Well, I certainly have found, I actually did one point just to look at the lunar graph over many, many, many years, most of my life. And when the moon is farthest out of bounds, north or south, were definitely periods of major events in my life.
Extremes, right?
Extremes.
Yeah.
And also when it's at the 0 degree, when it's at the crossover point.
That's a good point. Thank you for bringing that up. 0 is kind of that's a very good point. That completely slipped through the cracks here. Yeah, 0 degrees Aries, when Chiron entered 0 Aries, or 0 degrees Libra. Yeah, that's strong, very powerful. I mean, it's on the Aries point, really, when you think about it. Yeah, I remember when I was teaching with Bruce at Kepler, and we were doing the what was his name? Superman. Christopher, Reeve. Thank you. We did an entire case study on him, and he natally had Mars out of bounds. This is kind of how I started getting interested. And he was a big athlete. I mean, he was a fantastic athlete and in great shape. And when you looked at the declinations of how the accident hit and how he became the quote man in the wheelchair, Chiron became active with the declinations, and he became a man who worked with out of the wheelchair and tried to change the the nerve, the spine, whatever that's called, spinal connection work. And it was very interesting. So yeah, I feel when a planet is out of bounds, like a lot of these, Pluto and Sirius, they're out of bounds now. They're acting excessively. They're acting excessively. And I mean, if somebody wanted to do a study on revolution in the world, it'd be interesting to see what happens when Uranus goes out of bounds.
And if you combine that many out of bounds with, we also are in a year where the retrograde cycle is
Oh,
coinciding with a lot more planets all at one time.
out of bounds, all out of
Yeah.
bounds.
So it's like we're just getting this. It's we are
There's
we are getting to live the may you live in interesting times.
there's no connection to reality.
Yeah.
Because out of bounds is really, it's beyond reality. It's beyond what we know. It's beyond. And sometimes I think, well, maybe if you're out of bounds for a while, maybe while you're out there in outer space, you get an answer somehow. I don't know. But yeah, they can be very, and it's been very excessive. This has been a very excessive year, excessive. And the thing that I wanted to just make the impression with people is we just can't look at the time that the conjunction takes place. It's been happening. All of these have been happening for at least a year and a half now. So,
well, it's like it gives an underlying development cycle to what that you don't necessarily see so well, that becomes then really when the longitude aspect perfects.
mm-hmm.
It's like that's the spark or the oh, now we see this, but it's been happening. I think we see that in our lives all the time, where something occurs and then you realize, well, it was kind of almost inevitable from what I was doing for the previous year.
And to know that it's already happening.
Mm-hmm.
That's very, for me at least, it's comforting. Because I know it's already happening. I've seen it.
Right.
You wonder, why am I feeling like this? The conjunction hasn't even happened, but it's already happened, really. So we'll see.
Well, I love any workshop webinar that shows how important declination is, because it's something I've loved for a long time, and so few people use it anymore.
I know, that's I did this a few years ago at ESAR. I think it was 2000 something. And I thought about it. I thought, with everything that's going on in the world right now, it would be interesting to look at this. And I didn't have time to do a lot of them because we only had so much time today. But it is something people don't do much anymore. And I think they need to look at it. If you have time,
Well, even just for a natal chart, it doesn't take much to go get that declination and just see how your planets work on that and how they interact, and think about it. It's also a good way to.
Well, you can get the transits, Solar Fire. I'm sure that Sirius has it. You just get the transit sheet and you just add declination in there, and you can just intersperse that with your natal transits, and it gives you a much richer textured interpretation for you or your client, I think.
Definitely.
So.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for being here, and I hope that you found George's, if you haven't donated, that you found George's lecture at least worth a Starbucks coffee. What is that now about?
Starbucks coffee, folks. Think about it. Costs you $3 or $4 for a coffee.
Around here isn't it about $5 for a Starbucks fancy coffee? But still.
So just get a regular coffee and just donate a little bit more to Alexii Base, and I think you'll be helping a lot of future generations. And we're very proud. We've got 8,000 or 9,000 items loaded now.
Yeah, and we're going to get another 4,000 from Kepler when
right.
when the librarians can come up for air.
Right. So thank you for all the support over the years, and thank you for all being here. And I hope everybody has a great Halloween.
And the link for donating should actually be in the last reminder email, and will be in the when we get you a link to be able to view the recording. It'll be in that. And then Georgia just brought it up right now. alexandriabase.org/home/index.php. I don't know why they always put that in there. And then just donate at the end of it. But all you have to do is just get to the Alexandria iBase.
And there's a donate button right there.
And there's a donate button right there.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks, Enid.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your week.
You too. Bye-bye.